This is episode number 36 of the Fine Dining Podcast. Welcome to St. Louis.
This is Mystery Meat's Fine Dining Podcast, helping foodies discover new restaurants and new friends. Here's your host, the founder of Mystery Meat, Seth Ressler.
Hello, and welcome to Mystery Meat's Fine Dining Podcast. This is the podcast for foodies who love travel and travelers who love food. I'm your host. My name is Seth Ressler. This is how it works. Every week, we go to a different city and we talk to somebody who really knows the food scene there. Quite often, it's a food blogger. Sometimes it's somebody else who is really in the know about the culinary scene. And this week, we are headed to Fine Dining in St. Louis. We're going to be talking to Michael Sweeney of STL Hops. In fact, Michael, we've got you there right now.
Hello.
Can I call you Mike?
Yes, Mike would be great. Thank you.
All right. So, Mike, we're going to talk to you a little bit about STL Hops. We're going to find out about the culinary scene in St. Louis. You've got a restaurant recommendation for us, so we're going to get that from you. And then finally, we're going to play a game called Out of the Frying Pan. I'm excited for all this. You?
Very excited. I love games.
So let's start with STL Hops. What is that exactly?
It's a beer blog in St. Louis. About 5 years ago, my buddy Bill actually was running a blog called STL Bites, which was about food in St. Louis. And I said, hey, there should be something like that for beer in St. Louis. And so as him and I were sitting around, he came up with the name STL Hops. I went ahead and bing, bang, boom, started blogging, and it became kind of a big deal. We've got just a lot of readership, a lot of community that's come about because of it. I've been very proud of just what it's accomplished, and I think it's really helped to change the beer scene in St. Louis.
Well, that's very cool. Congratulations. Happy anniversary, by the way.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to talk to you about the beer scene in St. Louis, because I lived in St. Louis briefly about 10 years ago, and there was only one name in the beer scene, when I was there, that I knew of, and I think we all know who that name is when you're in St. Louis, because it's plastered on every single building as you drive around. You also have a podcast going on, right?
Correct. It's about almost 2 years ago. Some friends of mine, Bill, who I was just talking about, he, like I said, run STL Bites. My buddy Andrew Mark Vitti, he was running a food blog in St. Louis, and our friend Kelly Best Oliver, we all got together and started a food podcast called Stewed STL, talking about and talking to the people that are making food in St. Louis. It was kind of, places like Niche in St. Louis, Sydney Street Cafe, Bogart's, Pappy's, some of these big restaurants that are come up through St. Louis. We've had some of these guys on to talk about some of the things they're doing.
Well, it's good to have a fellow podcaster on. All right, so before we get into the city, you've got a trivia question for me.
I do, yes.
Shoot.
I actually wrote this a while back because I love trivia, and we had a food related trivia night not too long ago, and so I got to use this. So this St. Louis delicacy consists of an egg foo young patty served with dill pickle slices, white onion, mayonnaise, lettuce, and tomato between two slices of white bread. What is it called?
It's a St. Louis delicacy.
Yes, sir.
With egg foo young, pickles, and what else on white bread?
White onion,
mayonnaise,
lettuce, and tomato.
And what's it called?
Yep.
Gross.
No.
Is that good? Really?
It's not bad. I'll be honest. I had one for the first time probably a couple years ago, and I was expecting it to be pretty gross as well. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't that bad." So I don't know if that's a stellar recommendation for it, but it is what it is.
And it's a St. Louis delicacy, huh?
As far as I can tell, it's only found in St. Louis.
Okay. I'm going to have to think on that one. I don't know that one off the top of my head, so we're going to come back to that one, all right?
All right.
Let's talk about St. Louis. Now, of course, it's a huge beer town, and that's because it's the home of Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser.
Correct.
So that's the beer that I know from when I was living there, and everything in St. Louis was named Busch. Busch this, Busch Gardens, Busch Stadium, Busch blah, 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 blah. But talk to me about the beer scene now, because from what I understand, there's a lot of other beers, some craft beers that have popped up in the city of St. Louis.
Yeah, it's amazing just the transformation we've seen in the past. Like you said, you were here 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I would have called it a ghost town. You're right. It was pretty much two names in the game. It was Anheuser-Busch and then a smaller craft brewery, which is now a much bigger craft brewery named Schlafly. They came about in 1991. They opened up their first location, which they're still at, downtown St. Louis, and then proceeded to open up their second location, I believe, in 2003. Oh man, trying to remember that. I actually was a tour guide with them for a while, so I'm pretty sure it was 2003. And so Schlafly came about. They were the first craft brewery in St. Louis. And in that time, they've helped to, I think, bolster and bring about more craft breweries in St. Louis. In the past 5 years, we've seen 10 new breweries open in St. Louis. And in the past 3 years, we've seen 6 new breweries open up.
That's a lot.
Yes.
Is there anything you attribute the spike to?
I've had many interviews with people all across the globe where people have asked, is it because of the AB thing? And I say no. I don't honestly think AB being bought out by InBev caused this spike in craft beer. I just think St. Louis, as much as I love my hometown, is usually behind the times when it comes to some of these things. This stuff was happening on the coast for a long time. We saw this large increase in breweries across the U.S., and St. Louis had not caught up to it yet. And so I think that's more what's happening. I don't think it's necessarily people are dissatisfied with AB because they're still selling quite a bit of beer here in St. Louis.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I think people's taste have changed. I think you've got a lot of younger people that are looking for something, maybe looking for something that, people don't want to drink what their dad drank. And so I think they're looking for something new as well. So I think that's a huge reason we're seeing this huge spike.
Now, so talk to me about some of the beers that we should try if we're coming to St. Louis.
Oh, absolutely.
And full disclosure, you work for a beer distributor, right?
I do. I work for Lore Distributing here in St. Louis. And I do actually represent some of these brands, but, I love beer and I'll be the first person to, tell you if a beer is great or not. And so, just some of the brands off the top of my head. Tonight, I was at this place called 5 Star Burgers. They just opened up in St. Louis. Steve Gontram opened it. He used to work at Harvest in St. Louis, which was a very accomplished restaurant. He decided to open up a burger joint, but he carries nothing but local beers on tap. And so a couple beers that I had were the Civil Life American Brown. Civil Life is a new brewery, opened up in the past 18 months. Yeah, a little less than that probably. But their brown ale is just phenomenal. World-class brown. I mean, I can't find a better brown ale than this one. So chocolatey, rich, delicious. And the best part about Civil Life is they typically make beers that are under 5%. They're making those session beers, something that can be drank, 3 or 4 pints without you falling off your bar stool. So fantastic there. Four Hands Brewing. I had their Centennial Red tonight, and I actually gave them a little tweet, and I told them that they've really dialed it in. Just a fantastic hoppy beer. Centennial hops is the base of it. That's why it's called Centennial Red. Yeah, it's just got this really nice caramelly, malty backbone to kind of balance out these citrusy, bitter hops. Just a really phenomenal beer. Perennial Artisan Ales. They also, and all these breweries are actually located in the city of St. Louis, which is pretty cool.
Are they hard to get outside of St. Louis?
Civil Life started spreading a little bit. Perennial and Four Hands, I believe Perennial is now in Chicago and New York, and they're about to go to Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. I believe Four Hands is currently in Philadelphia. They're spreading out. These guys are, they're small, but they want to try to get as much beer out as possible, obviously.
Gotcha.
Perennial's Saison de Lis. It's a farmhouse-style Saison, Belgian-style beer. They use chamomile in it, which gives it this really lovely floral fragrance. It is by far probably one of the best food pairing beers in St. Louis because it just...
A Belgian beer with chamomile, that sounds really interesting to me. What would you pair that with?
Like I said, it kind of goes with just about anything. I mean, fish, it would just go lovely with. Because it's kind of light and easy to drink, you definitely pair it with Mexican food, believe it or not, that just because you got that spiciness of the beer, it kind of goes with that, kind of spiciness of the food and, some of that cumin and coriander notes. Yeah. So it's just a fantastic beer. And then I'd be bereft if I didn't mention that Second Shift Brewing. They're out of New Haven, Missouri. It's about an hour west of St. Louis. They make by far the best IPAs in St. Louis. I'm a hophead. I'll be the first to admit it. And those guys are just doing phenomenal beers.
Well, let's talk about some of the things besides beer that St. Louis is known for. What are some of the foods that really have given the city its reputation?
Yes. If you come into St. Louis, most people are going to try to get you to eat St. Louis style pizza.
Yes, I've had that.
Either people love it And the people that live in St. Louis the whole life typically love it. I've lived in St. Louis my whole life, and I wouldn't say I love it, but I don't hate it either. It is what it is. I know what it is.
It's unusual. It's different.
It is. It is. It's typically a very thin, crackery pizza with typically kind of a sweeter sauce. And then the cheese that's put on is not your typical mozzarella. It's a cheese called Provel, which is it's a processed cheese, which is a combination. I'm going to try to remember this properly. It's mozzarella, cheddar, and provolone, I believe. And the weird part about Provel is that when it spreads out across a pizza, it gets a little plasticky, is the best way to describe it. When you bite into it, it doesn't pull away from the pizza. It leaves your bite mark in the pizza. So
it's almost like slippery. It's the texture. It's unusual.
It is very unusual.
And where's the place? Emo's was the place to go for that when I was there. Is that?
Emo's is pretty much if you want to try St. Louis style pizza, they're kind of the originators of it. They're the ones that people will go for. I like Cecil Whitaker's better myself. And I think it's because Cecil uses a blend of mozzarella and Provel. So I like it a little better. And their sauce seems to be a little more peppery. So a couple other things, toasted ravioli.
Yes.
Which is basically deep fried. It's not toasted at all. It's deep fried breaded ravioli that's usually filled with meat. It's delicious. I got nothing bad to say about toasted ravioli.
Is there any egg foo young in there?
No, not in that one, no.
That was my best guess.
Yeah. Gooey butter cake.
Okay, what's that?
It's got like a cakey base, almost like a yellow cake base. And then this sugary, buttery topping that goes on top, usually covered with a little bit of powdered sugar. It's phenomenal. Pork steaks are another big one. So what they do is they take a pork butt and they cut it into steaks, usually no more than a ½ inch thick, but sometimes they get a little thicker. That's the way I like them. But they'll barbecue those. And when I say barbecue, I don't mean smoking. I should say they grill those. And then typically you'll throw them in some Mall's barbecue sauce, which is another St. Louis barbecue thing. And you let them sit in your pan for, 20, 30 minutes. And they kind of braise in that barbecue sauce and they fall apart. And then frozen custard's another big one. Ted Drew's, which is located on Chippewa.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that being huge. That was
Yeah. They're fantastic. What they'll do is they call them concretes. So what they'll do is they'll give you your ice cream and they'll turn it upside down with the spoon sticking out so you'll see that nothing falls out because it's a concrete. So yeah, it's delicious stuff.
So if I'm coming in and I want to explore a couple neighborhoods to go check some restaurants out in, pick a couple that maybe I should check out.
The first one I kind of thought about, and it's unusual because if you had asked me this like even a year ago, I would have never said it. It's Clayton here in St. Louis. It's kind of a business district. A lot of lawyers, a lot of businessmen sit in this area. And it's an area that, like I said, a year ago, did not really have much going on. But recently, the 5-Star Burgers that I went to tonight, that's in Clayton now. Half and Half, which is a breakfast spot, which I'm a big breakfast guy. I love breakfast. It's probably the best breakfast spot in St. Louis.
And that's interesting that you say that because when I lived there, I lived right on the border of University City and Clayton. Mm-hmm. In fact, my street was Forsyth, which, it goes right through the university there and then becomes Clayton. And you could literally see how the neighborhood turned from residential to like all of a sudden concrete, buildings as soon as you go into Clayton. But you're saying that that's a good place to go to eat now, huh?
It is. Gerard Kraft, who opened up Niche down in Benton Park, I want to say about 8 years ago now. I think he did it in 2004. So he's moved his original restaurant Niche from Benton Park to Clayton, which now sits next door to his brand new restaurant called Pastaria. And Pastaria is just a fantastic family spot. It's all fresh pasta, but it's all relatively cheap in that, $10 to $15 range. Great place to take the kids. They're making pasta. They're making pizza there. And then if you want something a little more upscale, in fact, I went to Niche about 2-3 weeks ago, and it was easily one of the best meals I've ever had. Not even, we often kind of joke around at Stewed about St. Louis good, where people are like, oh, this is good, but it's good for St. Louis. Like if it went to Chicago, it wouldn't be as good. But this was easily just a phenomenal meal, top to bottom. I talked to the chefs afterwards, and they said, hey, what'd you think? And I said, I wish I had something to complain about. I wish I could tell you guys you could do this better, just so you'd have some idea on what to improve upon. But I had nothing. It was just fantastic.
Can I ask, as a person from St. Louis, I always got the feeling that sort of Chicago was what St. Louis felt it lived in the shadow of, to a certain extent. That was what you compared yourself to as Chicago. Is that the case?
there is definitely an inferiority complex between St. Louis and Chicago. The one thing that we seem to hang our hats on is our baseball team. So.
And St. Louis is a great sports town for a lot of things. I mean, you've not only got the baseball team, but you've got... so when I was there was this guy named Kurt Warner who had gone from bagging groceries to playing quarterback and did pretty well there in the football season, which was a nice story. That was a really cool thing to watch and to be a part of, and to see. And then you got a fantastic hockey team there as well.
Yeah, well, yay, hockey's back. But yeah, the Blues have... I make fun of the Cubs because they can't seem to get a championship. The Blues have not seen or sniffed the Stanley Cup since 1963, I believe. So, we're kind of the losers on that side.
Fair enough, but it's a huge sports town.
Oh, it is. Very loyal, very diehard fans here.
So what about chefs? Are there some chefs that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, Gerard Kraft, huge chef in St. Louis. Kevin Nashin, he works at Sydney Street Cafe. Kevin bought Sydney Street 7-8 years ago now. And when he bought it, it was already kind of an institution, but it was one of those steak places. And I say that in a nice way, but I mean, it was the kind of place where people would take their date for a, Valentine's Day or an anniversary, or, it was just this very old school, this is just how it's there. And you've got servers that have worked there for 20 years. And so when Kevin bought it, he kind of transformed it a little bit. Not so much that it scared off the regulars, but enough to where he was doing some really cool things. And so he's killing it. I think he's actually one of the best chefs in St. Louis.
Oh, very cool.
Kevin Willman, who previously worked at Arado, which was in Edwardsville, he opened up a new restaurant called Farmhouse. Was won Food and Wine's Best New Chef, I think, in 2010. So Farmhouse has just been killing it. They're definitely a locally driven restaurant. They try to find and source all their ingredients as local as possible. Josh Galliano, who previously worked at Monarch and actually just announced a brand new restaurant that he's going to be working at. And all these guys were James Beard Midwest nominees. So, I mean, they're big chefs. And then we've actually had a new guy just come into town, and I have not eaten there yet. We have a new restaurant called Basso, which is located right at Clayton and Skinker. The guy's name is Patrick Connolly, and apparently he was a James Beard winner for the Northeast region, worked at some restaurants, I think Babbo in New York City. So this just opened, have not gotten a chance to eat there. We went there on a Friday night at 11 p.m. and the place was just slammed. So yeah, excited to see what happens there. It's a big beer place as well, which as a beer guy, I'm very excited about. So.
And what about the big foodie events? What are those?
We have the two biggest ones, I think, are definitely the Taste of St. Louis, which happens downtown. That brings out a lot of different restaurants. It's not just the high-end restaurants. It's going to be some of your places on the Hill, which is a very Italian part of town, which do, sometimes very good Italian and sometimes very mediocre Italian, but it is a mainstay. It's kind of a neat place to go. But you'll get some places like that. You'll get some of the new Mexican restaurants that are down on Cherokee Street. These are traditional taquerias, so you'll get some of those coming out to Taste of St. Louis.
How is Mexican food in St. Louis?
Much better than it was probably 10 years ago. In fact, the dining scene in St. Louis has grown exponentially and gotten much better in the past 10 years. I've been shocked, actually, just how much better it's gotten.
So, and again, my reference point is 10 years old, but when I was in St. Louis, there was ethnic diversity in the sense that there was a large minority population, but there was only one type of minority. I mean, there were no Asians, there were no Latinos, there were, is that still the case largely in St. Louis?
It's gotten better. We actually have a big Bosnian community here in St. Louis.
So was there Bosnian food?
Yeah, we're actually seeing more Bosnian restaurants. I can't say that I've ever been to one, but we've seen more Bosnian restaurants and more Bosnian grocery stores. So that's been fascinating to see. Big Vietnamese culture here in St. Louis. So you'll see a lot of banh mi and a lot of pho that's here in town. So that's always great. That's another little area of town, South Grand. If you can get down there, you'll find Banh Mi One is down there. Pho Grand is down there. City Diners down there. So you get kind of the after hours dining scene. Yeah. So you get some cool places down there as well. So,
and I'm sorry, I totally derailed you were talking about taste. You were talking about Taste of St. Louis.
Yeah, Taste of St. Louis. So yeah, that happens in I believe September. So it's typically a little cooler in St. Louis because the summers can be kind of unbearable at times. So. Another big event that happens is the St. Louis Brewers Heritage Festival, which actually started, I think this is its 5th year now, or it's upcoming its 5th year. And it was a way to showcase some of the new breweries that were coming up in St. Louis 4 years ago. But the reality was it was like 7 breweries. And now it's like 20 breweries that are, taking part in the event. So it's a cool little event that allows you to try all of these different beers from different breweries. It allows you to talk to the brewers. And for some of us beer guys, we get kind of, we see what's going on. We're into it. We're down with it. We know we've had that beer. We've had this beer. And I think an event like that opens up to the entire population that, hey, this is really cool. These beers are out there. It's giving people that maybe have never tried some of these beers a chance. So it's very cool.
That is very cool. That is very cool. All right, so we're going to get your restaurant recommendation in just a second here. I'm also going to find out, because I'm dying to know what happens when you put egg foo young in between 2 slices of white bread. So we're going to get the answer to that coming up in just a sec. Before we get back to Mike, a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, Taste Trekkers, the nation's first food tourism conference, is now officially going to happen this September in Providence, Rhode Island. Our Kickstarter campaign to raise the capital to launch this event for the first time ever was successful, so thank you to everybody who contributed, everybody who helped out, everybody who spread the word. We're totally excited about it. It's going to be fantastic. This is an event designed for anybody who plans their vacation around food, and you can find information on it over at Taste Trekkers, TasteTrekkers.com. And of course, as we get closer to the event, I will have more information for you here as well. Second item of business to take care of, I want to talk to you about Mystery Meat. These are the dinners that we have where we get a bunch of adventurous foodies together for a meal at a restaurant. But we don't tell them what restaurant it is until 24 hours in advance. So you have to be adventurous if you want to go on this. And we've got them going on in Boston, we've got them going on in Seattle, we've got them going on in San Francisco, and we are going to, next Tuesday, hold our very first Mystery Meat dinner in St. Louis. The very city that we're talking about today, with lots of fine restaurants. Which one is it going to be? I can't tell you, but there's clues over at the Mystery Meat website. So head over to mysterymeat.org/St-Louis, and you will find clues over there for the upcoming dinner next Tuesday. Please, please, please come out and join us. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you're a foodie, you're going to be totally into this. It's a great meal with great company. So head on over and get your tickets now. You can just click the link and you'll have a great time. I promise. I promise. You'll enjoy yourself. It'll be good. All right, this is the Fine Dining Podcast, and we are talking to Mike Sweeney of STL Hops. He's also from the podcast Stewed STL. And we were talking before, and you asked me a trivia question.
I did.
So give it to me one more time.
This St. Louis delicacy consists of an egg foo young patty served with dill pickle slices, white onion, mayonnaise, lettuce, and tomato between 2 slices of white bread. What is it called?
Man, I'm telling you, toasted ravioli is like the only thing I knew from St. Louis. So I'm kind of out. I have no idea. What is the name of this delicacy?
It's called a St. Paul sandwich.
A St. Paul sandwich.
That's the best part. It's not about St. Louis. It's about St. Paul. It doesn't involve any St. Louis ingredients. I don't know. It's just a weird sandwich. But
so where do you get this in St. Louis? Like
Chinese restaurants. You'll find it in some of the old school Chinese restaurants. They'll serve it.
All right. I asked you for a restaurant recommendation. What are you recommending?
My recommendation is this fantastic restaurant called Dressel's Pub. Obviously, I'm a big beer guy, and so I try to find restaurants that have a big emphasis on beer. And Farmhouse, which I mentioned earlier, does a great job with local beers, and they have a bunch of just a fantastic beer list. But Dressel's Pub has really upped their game as of recent. They brought on a new chef. His name's Michael Miller, and he previously worked at Niche. And so Michael has a big emphasis on local ingredients as well. And so they've really started putting together these simple yet elegant dishes. Very cozy, very warming. It's just a fantastic spot, especially during the winter. We haven't had a very cold one yet, but during the winter, it's just a fantastic spot. And so, Dressel's Pub is...
And the cuisine is pub food.
Pretty much. I would call it upscale. Is anybody using the word gastropub anymore? Maybe that. But yeah, it's definitely pub food, but more of on an upscale, level.
When I first walk into the place, what's the vibe?
It's what I imagine an English pub kind of looks like. Dark wood. You've got these benches that crowd around some tables. You've got this giant bar in the middle of the restaurant. And then you got the kitchen behind you. It's just a very, I say cozy, and I'll keep saying cozy when I talk about this place. But that's just what it is to me. It's, the kind of place where if it's raining and cold outside, you kind of walk in, you warm up and have a pint, and you'll be a lot happier because you did.
So I sit down, and I'm looking at the menu, and where should I start?
We had this dish the other night for the first time, and I don't know if I could ever eat it outside of when it's cold outside because it is kind of heavy, but they have this poutine.
Wait, maybe I'm the only one who doesn't know, but what is poutine?
It's a delicacy in Canada, which typically is French fries, cheese curds, and gravy. And that's it. It's comfort food. It's nothing fancy, but so when people make it nowadays, they try to make it all fancy, and Dressel's did too, but they made it awesome all at the same time. So they're using gnocchi, and they're deep frying gnocchi, which is like little potato dumplings.
Yep.
And then they are braising pork cheek. If you never had pork or beef cheek, you should try it sometime. It's amazing because there's a little bit of muscle in there, but not really much. And if you think about it, your cheeks don't do very much work, so they're going to be one of the most tender parts of your body. So they're going to be deliciously tender. And so they braise that, and then they serve that with some cheese curds on top with a fried gnocchi and a little bit of guanciale, which it's also the cheek as well, but this time it's not braised. It's kind of cooked up like a bacon. So that is just an insanely decadent dish, but it's absolutely delicious.
And this is an appetizer, or this is the...
Yeah, this is an appetizer you kind of share with people.
Yeah, I guess you'd have to, because,
Oh, yeah, you can't. If you're going to go in and eat it, which you can, go right ahead, have fun with that. That's all you're going to eat. Without, right. I mean, if you can do anything past that, more power to you.
All right, so assuming I have more room, what do you recommend for the main dish?
I recommend this with a big star on the side. I would have recommended this before. Dressel's Pub was actually just on diners, drive-ins, and dives, and that... I'm being nice. Stewed uses very foul language. That gentleman, Guy Fieri, he was on his show as well. But we knew about it here in St. Louis and thought it was awesome before he recommended it. So I'm going to say that's my asterisk on that. But anyway,
so we can assume that you hold the same opinion of Guy Fieri as the New York Times. Is that fair to say? Anthony
Bourdain put it best when he called him the Poochie of Food Network. Which, if you're a Simpsons fan, you know who Poochie is.
Yes, I do.
That's a pretty accurate description. So anyway, yes, it's the Porchetta Louis. So if you don't know what Porchetta is, it's basically it's a deboned pig that has its skin still on. And so they'll take some of that skin and they'll kind of wrap the pig up almost like a big roast. And they'll put some of that skin on the inside, and it gets crispy and fatty. And it's just this really, once again, decadent piece of pork. And so they'll roast that, and it gets just delicious. They have that with a little bit of rapini and a little bit of peppercini. And so it's a sandwich. And the thing that makes this sandwich so unique is that, like I said, this is going to circle back, and it uses Provel as one of its ingredients.
It's all coming together now.
Yeah. So it uses Provel. And one of the local food writers, Ian Frobe, basically, he's not from St. Louis, despises Provel. He said they did something that nobody else could do, which was make me like Provel, because it's just a fantastic addition to the sandwich, because Provel is a slightly smoky cheese. It, like I said, it doesn't move very much, so it keeps all the ingredients in place, and it adds a little bit of creaminess and a little bit of tanginess to the bitterness of the rapini and the peppercini. So,
that does sound good.
It is, yeah. It is just a fantastic dish.
All right, so what are we pairing with all this?
The beautiful part about the drinking is they are one of the few spots in St. Louis that offers cask beer. If you're not familiar with cask beer, when people go to England, they say, the beer was warm and flat. And that's because it's slightly less carbonated and slightly warmer than beer that's served in America. That's typically cask beer. It's an alive, beer is an alive product anyway, but this is definitely even more alive, because what it is, it's served at cellar temperatures, typically between 50 to 60 degrees. It's served without very much CO2. It's actually usually pumped up into your glass from a cask that's down below. And so as it sits, oxygen is actually pumped into the beer as well. So it begins to change the beer over time. The glass that you'll get at the beginning of the cask is not going to be the same one that's going to be there 2 or 3 days later, because that little bit of oxygen has changed the beer. So they usually have some kind of cask selection on at Dressel. So that's always a fantastic option. They serve a lot of local beers. Once again, back to Second Shift and Civil Life are usually always on there. And if you're a big whiskey fan, they have a huge selection of whiskeys and bourbons as well.
I have to tell you, I suddenly have, I feel like this need to call you before every glass of beer I ever drink from now on, because I feel like I need to get an expert's opinion. We've got the right guy here. Well, this sounds fantastic. What's this going to cost, per person for a meal?
I think this sandwich is going to be in that $12 range, but the most expensive entrees I don't think are more than $20 per entree.
All right, you ready to play a little game?
Sure.
All right, here we go. This game is called Out of the Frying Pan. Here's how it works. I'm going to ask you for a series of rapid-fire recommendations. Just tell me the first thing that pops into your head. No wrong answers here. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. We know that you're a beer guy, which is why I'm going to ask you, where is the place with the best wine list in St. Louis?
33 Wine Bar in Lafayette Square. Definitely one of the best wine lists in St. Louis. Also one of the best prices on wine in St. Louis. Usually, I think they have wine to go, which is always a great option. And I think usually when you open it up in the bar, it's typically $5 to $10 over what it would have cost to take it home. So just a fantastic wine selection there.
Do you have a favorite spot for outdoor dining?
Yes, I'll go with Milagro Modern Mexican. It is in Webster Groves. Adam Tilford over at Milagro, they've been trying to do some more upscale Mexican, it's actual Mexican food. They've kind of gotten a pushback and gotten a little more Tex-Mex in there, but they still do some really cool Mexican, authentic Mexican cuisine.
What about original cocktails? Is there a place to go to for that?
Yes, I like Blood and Sand quite a bit. It is a newer restaurant that's opened up in St. Louis. The one catch to Blood and Sand is it is a members-only restaurant. But if you're from out of town, I think they'll squeeze you in to find some great cocktails, usually at the bar.
Can we drop your name?
Sure, absolutely.
If we say we know Mike Sweeney of STL Hops, I'll let him know.
See how far that gets you.
Do you have a favorite place for late night food?
Five Restaurant. It's on the Hill. I would say the Five is probably the best place to get local food in St. Louis. I think he sources more local ingredients than any other place in St. Louis, and that's saying a lot because we've got some great places to do that. But they have a late night menu, which really brings in a lot of the chefs and whatnot that are working late. But they have also the best burger in St. Louis. It's only available on their late night menu. If you can get there and get there in time before the burgers run out, then you have to get that.
Last question. Favorite place to go for a business lunch?
If you like your business lunches a little casual, I would recommend the Good Pie. It sounds like they're actually about to move their locations. Right now they're in Midtown, but they're going to move to the U-City Loop here soon. They've got a great lunch special. Typically, it's a Neapolitan-style pizza, so they fire it in the oven. Takes about 90 seconds to make, but it comes with about a 10-inch pizza, maybe even a little smaller, and a salad. I think their Caesar salad is one of the best I've ever had. It's a little more casual, but it's still just a really nice spot.
All right, Mike Sweeney, your restaurant recommendation was Dressel's Pub. You can find them at 419 North Euclid Avenue in St. Louis. You can find them online at Dressels, DRESSELS, publichouse.com. And if people want to find your blog, your podcast, you on social media, how can they do that?
My blog is STL Hops. Typically, it's more about beer in St. Louis, so if you're not going to find anybody about me on that. If you want to follow me on Twitter, and I don't know why you would, but it's Mike P. Sweeney. That's the way you can find me there. Those are the two best ways to find me online.
Cool. And Stu STL, the podcast.
Yes, don't want to forget that. My friends on the podcast would be very upset if I did.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. This was fantastic. Had a lot of fun.
My name is Seth Ressler. This has been the Fine Dining Podcast. Couple of notes before we go. First of all, go to mysterymeat.org. Click the big orange button that says Get an Invitation and sign up to get an invitation for one of our Mystery Meat dinners. If we're not doing them yet in your town, get your friends to sign up. And when we see a bunch of interest in your town, we'll come there. Also, if you want links to any of the things that Mike and I talked about in this podcast, you'll be able to find them on the website. While you're there, you can follow us on Twitter. You can become a fan on Facebook. And if you like this podcast, do us a favor, please subscribe in iTunes and leave a review while you're there. And finally, if you want to be a guest, if you're a food blogger or food expert, you want to come on the show, tell us about your town, go to mysterymeat.org and click the Contact Us link and send us an email. We would love to talk to you. Thanks so much for listening.
This has been Mystery Meats Fine Dining Podcast. You can find links to the websites mentioned in this episode at mysterymeat.org/podcast. Thank you for listening.